Good morning. My name is Yaku, and this session will be about qualitative research. If I look to the right, it's simply because I moved your portraits to the other side. Session 3 will be about qualitative research. The next one will be about quantitative. I will touch a little bit on quants in this session also, but not extensively so. It will be more illustrative to compare it to what is happening in qualitative research. Okay, so let's continue. Right, so let's start this with what is qualitative research. And when you look at qualitative and quantitative means, in simple words, as we said yesterday, and it's a very simple way of looking at it. Quantitative is about numbers, it's about quantifying, it's about taking data and quantifying that data. Qualitative research is about interpretation. It is about explaining how people view or see the world around them. So that first explanation there, or definition of qualitative research by Marut, says qualitative research is the systematic collection, organization and interpretation of textual material derived from talk or conversation. It is used in the exploration of meanings of social phenomena as experienced by individuals themselves in their natural context. Now that is a mouthful, but hopefully what we'll be able to do is throughout this session we'll be able to unpack that that statement or definition as we go along. But I think sometimes people get confused and think that qualitative research is more loose and less connected than maybe quantitative research, and that it's easier to do because there's no constructs and it's not really connected. And that is not true. You will see the first sentence, it starts there with, it's the systematic collection and organization, blah, 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 of data. So you start with collecting data according to a very systematic plan and then organizing that data to make sense of it. So it's not a loose or easy way of doing research at all. Leiden Omrot, and you will also see this in your study guides, says that broadly qualitative research approaches focus on phenomena, something that occurs in a natural setting or the real world. Now, in contrast, in quantitative studies, usually we do experiments or we use a quasi-experiments in order to test something. Now, phenomena or phenomenon, if it's one thing, is something that we want to test. For instance, what is currently very much in the news is the reconsideration of the minimum wage, right? I think also something that's also very topical now is the sort of hybrid work system, work a little bit from home, work a little bit from the office, and then obviously also people that is working completely from the office and then completely working from home. So all of those are current issues. Now those are phenomena that can be studied, right? How do people feel about working from home? And if you want to take that then to a quantitative type of thing, we can say X amount of people are currently working from home. But when we look at that from a qualitative perspective, it will be more in depth. How do people feel? How do they react? What is their experiences of working from home? So in qualitative research, it is about capturing and studying the complexity, the depth of those phenomena. Quantitative studies is very much about the breadth. You know, it's broad statements and saying currently in South Africa, 15% of office workers are still working from the office, 20, whatever, and then people will break that down. That is quantifying the work, where studying the complexity of something, we will look at a very selective or very small group of people and say, in our company, the following people working from home are experiencing this and this and this and this. And then you will try to interpret those experiences and classify those experiences. And you will see that bold right there at the bottom of the screen. Qualitative research is about interpretation. And I say that I say that carefully, because also sometimes people may think that interpretation means that how I feel about it, or how my interpretation, and it's about what I think, or what, and it's not true. Your interpretation must be grounded in theory. There must be a reason why you interpret something the way that you do. Now we'll go into the credibility of qualitative research more towards the end of the session. But it's very important to sort of from now understand that interpretation is not just, oh well, because I think so. You must, throughout your qualitative and even quantitative research, in order to make that credible or valid or markable, if you know, is to all the time throughout your study, from the very beginning, from where you select your topic, is to always explain how you got to that. How did you get to that way of thinking? Or how so getting a notebook, I can tell you now, it's very important. I love using these little Croxley lined. It's simple. You can get them just about at any store. I love using those, and you just make notes of everything that you do. Why do you think? How did you get? How? Why? Ask yourself all the time. Make notes of where you got the data. How did you think, or how did you get to that conclusion? Because those are your sort of field notes throughout your study, and you can incorporate that into your findings at the end of your study. So, more on what is qualitative research. So, qualitative research is about description. It is useful to uncover the multifaceted nature of certain situations, setting, processes, relationships, systems, or people. So, we will look at how we view the world in just a bit, but all of these, interpretation, verification, evaluation, all of this is these descriptions are also in your study guide, but it all basically boiled down to one thing of interpreting what a group of people or a specific situation is experiencing, and putting that into words. You will see there the next, I love this interpretation. Research is useful because it enables a researcher to gain new insight into a specific phenomenon, or develop new concepts or theoretical perspectives. And it's very important to understand that you don't want to, in all research actually, you don't want to impose your opinion on the research. What you want to do is you want to gain insights. The information must come from the data, because otherwise it will move towards biases, and that is something that we completely want to avoid in any type of research, because it's very easy to go and look for answers. If you have an opinion about something, it's very easy to go and look for answers and find those answers, but that is a confirmation bias. Research must come from the data. The data must tell you what is happening, or why something is happening. Right. So and this is more of my pragmatical nature, my practical way of looking at things. I want to know what where does data, where do we go? What is the final sort of thing that we want to create with our research? So this is also a little bit about the iterative, going back and forth nature of qualitative research, but I like to know what the final product will look like. And maybe specifically because a lot of you will probably do research now for the first time in your life, is this overall picture of where do we want to go with qualitative research. So as I've explained up until now, qualitative research, we want to explain or describe a phenomenon in depth. So we want to look at a specific situation, a specific person or person's experience of something, and explain that in depth. So what we're going to look at is we want to see what is recurrent themes. Now that sounds very big, but actually what we want to see is if we interviewed 10 people about working from home, then we will maybe see themes emerging, like stress because I can't get connected to the internet. That may be a theme. Working more or overtime, so that will be another theme, but people will explain it or tell that in different types of ways, but those are themes, those are big themes that will start, or maybe I say will, but may start to emerge from those different interviews that you have from the 10 people. And then you may also have what they call the outliers. One person may experience something, and that won't be necessarily a theme that's emerging because it's not grounded. There's not enough people experiencing that to say, okay, we can now go and categorize that in from our theory. So we're looking at patterns of behavior. Now, patterns of behavior will implies that there's more than one. So maybe from this group of people that we interview, we may found as a pattern that very much grounded. These people say, yes, we're not taking breaks anymore during our workday. And I say may because remember this is like everything just sort of happening in my head right now. Or people may say that working overtime or working more, spending less time with family. So those are patterns that may start to emerge from the study. And a pattern means there's more than one person that is happening to. If it's one person, I don't know, what's a good example, saying, I take a break every half an hour to drink orange juice, then, that's one person's pattern, and it's not necessarily something that we can say happening, a pattern of behavior from the group, and something that we'll then maybe dismiss in our final findings. We'll make a note of it and maybe mention it, but it won't be something that we specifically put in the patterns. Part of the purpose of qualitative research is to create survey instrument measures. So before we can get to quantitative research or find out what it is that we want to test, often qualitative research is used in order to get to that theory in understanding. So let's use our people working from home as another example. Then what we can do is we say, okay, we have found in our theory, our patterns of behavior, we have found in this group that there is, and now we start to develop our model, and in our model we have people are getting up earlier, we have people working overtime, people are more stressed, and once again, this is just stuff in my app because I think most likely people are less stressed working from home. But anyway, so now we sort of have these three constructs that we can go and test, and then we can take that into a survey instrument, into a quantitative research, where we can go and say, okay, how can we generalize this to a larger population? Can we test this? And then you take those, create a survey instrument that we can send out to a larger group of people and do a quantitative study and say, okay, 50% of people are working harder, 30% are experiencing more stress, etc., etc. So we can use our qualitative research to develop survey instruments. Another per product or end model of qualitative research is your taxonomies or classification systems, where we classify people into different groups. If we, let's say, use the company as our basis for the research, then we can say in this company there are people working from home. This is their experience. There are people that are, for instance, the atypical and B typical people type of research that was done earlier in the 20th century. And then this is usually what qualitative research leads to, and I say usually because at this level, at your research report level, you'll most likely only look at recurrent themes, thematic analysis. But when you get to master's level and postgraduate, more the postgraduate stuff, but really masters and doctorates, you will, with qualitative research, start to develop conceptual models and theories, understanding certain situations, how the world fits together, and explaining a certain phenomenon. But like I say, at this level, the patterns, the thematic analysis is more than adequate for the level of studies that you're going to do. Right, so this is just a general overview, and Zoe will probably touch on this again. I'm going to look at the left-hand side of the thing mostly. It's qualitative, and this is an overview of what qualitative. So our approach is inductive. Inductive means the information comes from the data. Right, we have theory that we've looked at. We understand the constructs. We understand where everything is coming from. But when we look at the data, we want the information. Our final themes must emerge from the data. Where with qualitative studies, it's deductive. We test something. We want to see how something works, or test a certain theory or hypothesis, or whatever the case may be. Qualitative, we looked at depth. We want to generate something and that is where the inductive nature of it comes from. The setting is usually natural. We will investigate people, talk to people, get information from them, go to the workplace. That is why your general, and once again, what you will use most likely in your studies will be interviews or focus groups, because that will come from a natural setting. Sampling is purposeful because we investigate a specific phenomenon. We select people to participate in our study with purpose. Now you see on the other side, qualitative is random, and the reason for randomness is that we want to generalize the findings to a certain population, so we need that sampling to be random. And even with stratified sampling and random, blah blah blah, it still comes down to it must be random in order for generalization. But with qualitative study, because we study a specific phenomenon, we want that to be purposeful. So if we say we are investigating the experiences of the lecturers working from home at BMT College, then that is a very purposeful sample of people that we will interview. We won't interview the people working from home who works for Marion Roberts, for that, because it doesn't make sense in our setting. Even when we get to BMT College, we won't interview the people working from the office. because for this purpose we want to know the experience of the people working from home. But now, and that is a very homogeneous sample that we will use here. Now, homogeneous meaning single. Heterogeneous, if we want to expand it, because it can still be qualitative, because maybe the people working from the office experience frustration with the people working from home because they can't get in contact with them, and this is maybe. And then we want to also include those people, but then it will be stated in the purpose of your study. So sampling will be purposeful, and that will come from your research question. And for those of you that were yesterday, your research question, what will be discussed tomorrow, becomes very important, because it's sort of it is at the center of your study throughout your study. It will guide everything that you do. There's a very nice picture, and I haven't adapted that to this presentation, but there's a very nice picture in your first steps, the prescribed textbook that Maria shows, where the research question is right at the center of your research, and you need to look at that all the time, because that will guide everything else that's happening in your study. Data collection, like I just said, it will be mostly, and once again at your level, probably be interviews or focus groups. There are other ways of data collection that we will quickly look at now, but it is textual. It is something that has been converted to text, that you can go and look for answers, that you can interpret, that you can say and create those themes from, and mark and say, this person has said this person has said that, but this is the theme, we can interpret what both of them has said as a theme. Right. Like I said, data analysis is iterative, and about interpretation. Now, iterative means we go back and forth, and it's really from the very beginning, where you start to do your literature review, when you start to develop, when you do that first interview. So you do your interview, the interviews in qualitative is usually about an hour and a half. Now you do that interview. My sister did the interview in her studies. It was a 4-hour interview. Now imagine that getting that transcribed. But anyway, now you do that first interview. You take that home, or wherever you go, and you start to filter through what this person has said, and you say, well, this is interesting. Then you go back to the interviews, and maybe in the next interview, or the interview with the same person, you may delve a little bit deeper into what has been said in certain themes. So you, other than qualitative, where you collect the data, and after you've collected the data, you go and analyze the data, and then you start to write up your findings. With qualitative, it is really going back and forth, and going back to the theory, and oh wow, I found this statement. Where can I find theory to actually support this statement? Is there theory to support this statement? And writing up on that, and that's what also makes qualitative a very, very exciting form of research, because it's really delving deeper into what people are experiencing, or finding out. So let's look at the research design. So research design, and like I said earlier, it is it's a strategy, it's a plan. It is not just a systematic way of doing things. So Maria, in your study guide, you will see, he says a research design is a plan or strategy that moves from the underlying philosophical assumptions to specifying the selection of participants, the data gathering methods to be used, and the data analysis to be done. So let's just break that down into the different parts, because it's really sort of 4-5 parts to this statement. And we start with a research design is a plan or a strategy. Now, If you're going to do quantitative research, then most likely your plan or strategy will be set up at the beginning, and that plan or strategy will remain the same throughout until you've collected your data, analyzed your data, on through to the end. With qualitative, you will still have a plan or a strategy, because you can't just go in blind and say, I'm going to interview people and see what happens. You still need a plan or a strategy of how you are going to perform your study. But as you go along, your plan or strategy may change. Specifically, if new themes or new themes emerge from your data, then you may want to change your strategy and say, wow, okay, no, maybe my research is going into a different direction than what I originally thought. That moves from the underlying philosophical assumptions. Don't worry about that too much at your level. I will quickly touch on this moving on, but it's basically how you see the world, how you interpret the world, and how we can make sure that what we know, that we really know what we know. But the next part is very important, because that is specifying the selection of participants, and that gets back to your research question of why do we select specific participants to take part in our study? Why do we gather data in a certain way? And how are we going to analyze that data? Now, sometimes people love to rather go and say, oh, I want to do, and I had this discussion with Zoe actually yesterday, I want to do a quantitative study. But my research question, or the thing that I want to investigate, doesn't really lend itself towards a quantitative type of study. And when you look at your question or your problem that you are currently investigating, if people say, oh, well, I'm going to just select participants, I'm going to interview my friends, but maybe your friends aren't part of the problem, so interviewing them doesn't make sense in the study. And it's easy to sort of get confused and try to shape your study to fit in what you want to do, rather than looking at a problem, which is what research is about. And research is about, this is a problem, what is the best way to investigate this problem and find answers to that problem. And sometimes it will be a quantitative study, and sometimes it will be a qualitative study, and sometimes it will be a random group of participants, and sometimes it will be, so the problem, the question, the thing that you're investigating must drive your study, and not what I want to do, or what is easy to do. I hope that makes sense. Right, so I will quickly look at that at this, because this summary is also in your study guide. In qualitative research broadly, there's really 5 sort of approaches that we can do research. One is narrative. A narrative qualitative research is about the retelling of stories of people's lives, and that is primarily through interviews and documentation. And then this is just the retelling of stories. So that is where probably you will get an autobiography as an end product and something. But phenomenology studies is understanding an experience from the participant's point of view. And if you've been listening up until now, if we're gonna look at the experiences of our lecturers working from home, that will most likely be a phenomenology type of study in understanding what are their experiences. And everything else that I've said up until now, maybe the experience, maybe, if that's not grounded in theory, if there's not, we start with the interview, in that first interview with maybe summary, we sit down and we say, okay, we have this hour or whatever interview, and she tells her experience about how it is working from home, blah blah blah, and then we go back and start to dissect that and say, okay, so she experienced this, she experienced that, she experienced that, rather than from a researcher. As a researcher, you want to be unbiased. You don't want to impose whatever you think or think the answer should be onto the people that you research. And then once you get that feedback, then you go back maybe to your second. Then you go to Elzon and say, okay, Elzon, tell me about your experience. Then you listen to it. Now, because you've already had the conversation with Sumari, you can ask not leading questions, but you can, okay, but explain that to me a little bit more, if she mentions something. And then you can use both of those types of things. Okay, we can start to develop a theme around that. Now, interviewing is an art. You will see there's a lot of information about that on various websites and ways of doing it. And but interviewing is the sort of accepted way of doing, or most often way that qualitative research is being done. And the same goes with grounded theory. Now, of grounded theory, I think once again it's highly unlikely that that at your level you'll be doing grounded theory research, but the idea of grounded theory is that something will the theory will come from the data. Now, thematic analysis is sort of the start of grounded theory, but then with grounded theory, what it really means is when you analyze all of that data, you can see the strands. And Atlas TI is an amazing program, because it will really show how grounded your different themes are in the different theories or concepts or themes that you've started to create from that. Ethnography is about understanding how behaviors reflect the specific culture or group of people, and it's usually done through observations, interviews, and artifacts, documents, etc. Case studies is also this is also something that you may actually do, is understanding a specific person or situation. It is but it's very in depth, because you will look at multiple sources, you will look at documents, you will look at policies, you will look at archives, you'll do interviews, observations will be done. If you go to a company, when we speak about physical artifacts, you will look at the way things are being set up. So the case study of something is really everything that has to do about that case, in order to understand why things are happening the way that it is happening. The next part, data analysis. You can go through that in your study guide, the different types of coding and finding themes, etc., etc. All of that is captured in your study guide. And then your final reporting, what it will look like. So for instance, in your narratives, it will be a detailed picture, a description of an individual's life. Like I said, that will be most likely be in a form of an autobiography. And in phenomenologically, it will be the description or the essence of the experience. Grounded theory, we will have a new theory or a theoretical model or a concept, or your what did we say, the classifications of different things. Ethnography will be a description of the cultural behavior or group of individuals, and then in a case study will be an in-depth description, an explanation of why and how things happened in a specific situation. Right. So let's just go back there. We said that research design is a plan or strategy that moves from the underlying philosophical assumptions. And once again, you can go and look at this in more depth from your study guide and from your textbook. Ontology is really the question of what is reality. Now, this may sound very, well, it is a philosophical grounding of it. Is what is reality? Ontology, I just like to remember it as sort of that Om when you meditate, the ontology and Om, what is reality, and thinking about all that. So, grounded in qualitative research, there's sort of 5 different ways, and you can go and look at that in your study guide. But it basically comes down to interpretivism, and post-positivism and even postmodernism is sort of iterations of interpretivism, which means that reality can only be assessed through social constructs, language, consciousness, shared meaning. And the postmodernists, in my opinion, love to challenge that. They say, no, we're changing conventions and it's not that and it's not this. But basically, it is once again that they want to use social constructs to evaluate and understand what is happening. So interpretivism, when we look at that, it is basically that we can create reality, or that we understand reality through language, through consciousness, through shared meaning, and that is what reality is. Where, in contrast, when you look at quantitative type of research, which is more on positivist type of grounded in positive philosophy, we really look at it is based on processes, it is based on numbers, it is based on certain laws of how the world works, and it is, both of them are very important, because if we don't have that, then we wouldn't have the theory of relativity and all of that nice physical type of stuff. Epistemology is how do we know what we know? Like it says there, it's concerned about how things can be known, ways of learning about the world and its constructs. Now, like I said, I'm just lightly touching on this. It's not very likely that you will have a very big thing in your research report on this, but I just want to point this out. When we look at how do we know what we know, one of the things that is looked at is the relationship between the researcher and the researched. And Guba and Lincoln, they're very prolific in saying that the researcher needs to be independent. They can't be biased. But there's also schools of thought that said it is impossible for the researcher to be unbiased while they are doing research. But that relationship between the researcher and the researched must be explained in your study or in your report, so that when somebody read that we also understand, oh, okay, so this is that relationship. It maybe was part of observation, or part of the research was part of the research as an observer, and so that we better understand maybe how you got to the findings in your final report. One of the questions that how do we know is it objective or subjective? And obviously we're looking for objective knowledge to emerge from your study. Subjective is you imposing your thoughts and feelings and personal opinions on what is being researched. But as a researcher, you want to remove yourself from that as much as possible in both quantitative and qualitative studies. Is it generalizable? So we can apply that to a group of people and say the people in South Africa, but in order to do that, we will most likely use a type of a quantitative approach. Is it transferable? and transferable means we can use certain aspects of our study and transfer that when the conditions is the same in another person or in another situation or in another phenomenological experience. Right. Sampling, we've spoke about that. I see we've got about 20 minutes left, so I'm not going to try to fly through everything, but I've touched on most of everything that we will speak to in the rest of this presentation. So sampling, we said qualitative generally makes use of purposive sampling. And I added that part is to say that participants are chosen purposefully as experts, and experts experts doesn't mean they have a degree or a doctorate in stress management. That's not what would mean. And for instance, one of the study that I'm trying to do right now is looking at the stress, the technology stress experienced by people. Now, in order for somebody to be an expert, is they have to work with technology and they have to experience stress. That doesn't mean they've completed a degree in technology stress. That's not the expert part of it. I just want to know that as a participant, you will be able to give me meaningful and deep information about your experiences using technology. Right. So if a person is mostly working from home, from the office, and your research study is about people working from home, then obviously the person working from the office is not an expert, and to interview them doesn't, it won't provide deep and meaningful data towards your study. I hope that makes sense. Unless you expand that and your study is about the experiences and feelings and of how people react to the people working from home, then obviously the experts will be the people working from the office. So that experts, they must represent the specific phenomenon, the group, the incident, location. So usually you do, when you look at your textbook, Maria sets it out, you will see there's different classifications of the type of people that you can use in your sampling. But usually I say usually very broadly, because obviously depending on your study that may change, but usually the group of people that you will interview in the participants in a qualitative study will be very homogeneous. That means they will all have very specific conditions. And when you look at the next, the participants are selected based on predetermined criteria. You will say participants are selected because they are between 25 and 35 years old. They are selected because, and you will actually in your research proposal or your research plan or what, you will set that out. You will say, I've selected people to present between 25 and 35 because I've selected mostly to interview people. Well, I've selected people to interview who are working from home because I've selected to interview only this group of earning above a certain salary, that type of thing. But you must be very clear about why you've only selected that group of people, and it's very easy to move into discrimination, something that you want to avoid in all of your studies. So if you choose to only do your study on, for instance, women working from home, what is your reason? Why? What is the theory underpinning your reason to only study that experience or phenomenon in women? Otherwise, if you just say because I want to, then that's not a reason, and then it may move towards sort of discriminatory studies, and your findings will be difficult to interpret and report on. Like I said at the bottom one, criteria must be relevant. The criteria of your sampling must be relevant to the study, and it must be grounded in theory. So there's a lot of literature review that obviously starts before you even get to your sampling and all of that. And that is why we said yesterday, and I sort of just want to reiterate that, if you haven't started to think about your topic, or if you haven't started to think about your study, please do. The 22nd of October is really, really, really around the corner, and the amount of literature review and thinking that needs to go into your study is actually a lot. Okay. Okay, we've got 15 minutes. Qualitative studies are guided by data saturation. That means a question that you will maybe already start to ask. So how many people do I need to interview? And the answer is actually as many as it takes. And that means simply until the data is saturated. Now, that is why the next section, that the data collection is ongoing, cyclical, and iterative, means that we go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth all the time. So once I've interviewed Sumari about her experiences working from home, and I started to sort of identify things that I maybe picked up in theory. Now I go to Elzan and I start to interview her. Now I start to see themes, but Elzan mentioned a couple of other things that Sumari didn't. That means there's no data saturation. Then I maybe go back to Sumari, or then I move on to Faye, and I say, Faye, what was your experiences? And Faye brings new views of looking at things. And then I go back to the data, and that is why I say it's iterative. It's back and forth all the time, until you get to a point. Now I've interviewed everybody or I've interviewed, let's say, 50% of the people working at the college of our lecturers, and no new themes are emerging. Then I say, well, there's no sense in interviewing more, because the last 2 or 3 people that I interviewed, there hasn't been any new themes that emerged from those interviews. Or if those interviews are going, then you can continue your interviews. However, and you will see that from Maria, from Guba, from all of these guys, at some point you need to stop, because otherwise you will just continue with your interviews for forever. So there are guidelines when it comes to this, and usually with qualitative studies, depending on the type of research you are doing, the interviews can be anything from 10 to 25 usually, when it comes to the research. But like I say, it can be more and it can be less. I'll use Dr. van der Linde in her research. She started out with a plan of only doing focus groups, and only a number of focus groups. That then it sort of, whoa, okay, there's stuff happening that she didn't anticipate, and then it moved on to collecting information from individuals. And at one point, she just, okay, well, I actually need to sort of end my study now. But if I believe if she really wanted to, and from her data, you can see that she could have go on and on and on and on and on with the collection of data. But at some point you also need to stop. So as a guideline, you'll probably look at about 10 to 12 interviews, but that will be guided by your research supervisor, because depending on the study, it may be as little as 5. Maybe you interview 5 experts, 4-hour-long interviews with breadth of data, and you've got more than enough information to go and get themes and analyze. Or maybe it's shorter type of interviews, half an hour to 45 minutes, and you only have very limited information that you can go and analyze, and then maybe you will need more things. So that is also in your study guide. You say it's basically reflect or identify gaps, plan further data gathering, collect data, and that is a process that can go on literally forever. And then if you decide to study further, then also at maybe a postgraduate level, or a master's or a doctorate, then you can use some of this as a foundation, just build and build and build and build on your studies. So data collection techniques, those are all the different ways that you can get information. One of those, the one at the bottom, this is also listed in your study guide, but the one at the bottom, diaries, journals, and memoirs, is a very if you don't want to do interviews or you find it difficult to do interviews, it's a great, specifically the diaries and journals. You instruct your participants in how to do the diaries. What is nice is maybe you can ask them to reflect on 4 or 5 different points every day, write out what they've felt, and you monitor them over a period of time. And that really goes for more longitudinal studies instead of just a cross section and say, okay, this is how they felt at a specific day or moment. But the diaries is a great way of collecting data, and then it is already in a format that you can go and look at and analyze, and don't have to transcribe. When it comes to interviews, I think this is sort of one of the next. Observation is another way of collecting data in qualitative studies, and it's explained in a lot more detail in your textbook. But it's less likely that you will use observation as at your level of studies. Just a note, you will see here, it's got 2 sides. The researcher's identity is revealed and the researcher's identity is concealed. Now, when it comes to working with people, companies, organizations, then the researcher's identity is concealed, becomes very ethical, questionable. Ethically. So, Faye spoke about that yesterday. People need to give informed consent when it gets to studies. So researchers identify with observation, and qualitative research usually goes into studying natural phenomena in nature. For instance, if you want to observe how birds, the mating rituals of birds or whatever, then concealing your identity, not interfering in their habitat, etc., etc. That is why this is part of observation on this side. But look at the situation and once again discuss that with your research, with your supervisor, if you want to do observation types of data collection. Interviews, most likely 98% more than that will probably end up doing interviews, and interviews is really broadly either into the individual interviews or into group interviews, and like I stated there at the bottom, interviews can be either open-ended, it can be semi-structured, or it can be structured interviews. And interviewing is really an art. Saunders, they've got an amazing chapters about interviews and how to do different types of interviews. But there's also a lot of information on the internet of how to do different types of interviews. Most likely, and I would suggest at the undergraduate level that either semi-structured or structured interviews will be more appropriate. But once again, be guided by your research supervisor. Focus groups is a way of interviews, and what's nice about focus groups is you've got different people bouncing. One person will say something, and it hopefully triggers a response from another person, and it just allows that group to interact. And as the researcher, you sort of just you ask a question and just leave the ball in their court, and the ideal situation is where this focus group just starts to bounce off ideas, and those opinions and thoughts and beliefs sort of just starts to build, and you've got this amazing group and very rich data. Obviously, you don't want the people to end up fighting, so once again, as a researcher, you sort of have to have these mitigation techniques to just make sure that everybody stays on track. Now, in both interviews and focus groups, something like Zoom is amazing to use because, and once again, Dr. van der Linde actually applied this in her studies. She used Zoom as a primary source of collecting data in this manner. And because Zoom allows you to record, like for instance this session being recorded. What is great about that is you can then go and use that in your when you analyze the data without having to transcribe the data into lines. You can actually just use the recording and analyze the recording, so that will save you some money in transcription and getting the information on paper. So use technology as much as you can. If you're not sure, we've got more than enough people that can help you, and even if Zoom has got the free version, and then Google has got the Google meetings, and so there's just a lot of tools and free tools that can be used in order to analyze your data. Okay, I will quickly go through this data analysis when you get to that end part of your study. First thing that you need to do is you need to prepare your data. That is describe the sample, the participants, transcribe data, get to know the data. And that is just really you delve, with specifically with qualitative studies, you delve into that and you read and read and read again and go, or if you've recorded it, you will listen and listen and listen and listen. And because it's iterative, if I started with summary, by the end of my studies, I would have probably listened to her recording 100 times. I will probably be able to, oh yes, she said that in line 4, blah, blah, blah. And that helps with describing your sample and organizing the transcribe and just getting to know the depth of your data. Coding the data, emergent, it must come from the data. That is emergent type of coding. A priori means it's based in the theory. So if you found a certain ideal in theory, for instance, there may be theory out there or information on people experiencing stress working from home. So whenever you see that, that will be stress, but it's an a priori. It's a code that you've predetermined that will most likely be found in your data, and then you just code your data according to that. Then step 3 will be establishing themes or categories, and then from step 4 will be interpreting the data. So this is where we make sense of it. We want to do crystallization. We want to make sure that it can be confirmed. The data must, the triangulation really means that it is evident from the data that we collected that this information, that this theory, that this thing that I've created can actually come from. That is where your validation also comes from. And reaching conclusions. And I'm really flying over data analysis because once you've done your research report, when it gets to doing your research report, we will go into the analyzing of data in more detail. I just like to get an idea of where we are going with research and why we are doing certain things. Then with reaching conclusions, like I said, and I think I've said this from the beginning of this presentation, it must be grounded in your findings from the data, triangulated with theory and your literature review. So it's not my own thoughts and feelings as a researcher that becomes evident in the data. It must be grounded. What did your participant say? If a participant didn't say it, then it's not just, well, I feel my participant didn't say it, but I feel maybe she wanted to say that. You can't, as a researcher, you must be objective in your research, not impose your own feelings. Establishing trustworthy and credibility. Main difference between quantitative and qualitative. In quantitative, we look for reliability and validity, where with qualitative studies, we're looking for credibility. Is your research credible? And that is basically from now, when you start now, go and get yourself a little notebook and make notes. Make why did you make that decision? Why did you choose this type of sampling? Why did you choose? Ground it in theory. That makes if you can explain every thought and action in your study, then that makes your study credible. Okay, if you just make decisions because you feel like it, but you don't explain why you made that decision, then your research becomes less credible, because as a marker or as a reader of your research, I don't know how you got to a certain conclusion. You need to really explain everything, and that is what's making your research credible. I may not believe or agree with your final research, but at least I know how you got to your final conclusion and what your thought process was in getting to that. Okay. Transferability, dependability, confirmability. Once again, that's stuff that you will go into detail once you do your final analysis and your final research report. And once again, Maria, in his first steps in research, is explaining this in a lot more detail. I will share these slides as just a general guide for doing research. Okay, so with a little bit creeping into Zoe's time, sorry Zoe, the summary of what we discussed here is what is qualitative research. In short, it is non-numerical. We're not looking for statistical data, percentages, numbers, explaining data in numbers. We want to see, interpret, and describe the world in depth through the eyes of the selected participants. That is the purpose of qualitative studies, right? Research designs, we've got that. I just repeated that the research design is about a plan or a strategy that moves from the underlying philosophical assumptions to specifying the selection of participants, the sampling, the data gathering methods to be used, and the data analysis to be done. And when we look at qualitative research, usually we use purposive sampling, specifying it is purposive. There's a specific purpose of why we selected that group of people to participate in our study. Data collection is through documents. It's textual, and although observation is there, it is usually in undergraduate or at your level, it most likely will be through interviews and focus groups. And then finally, when we get to the data analysis, it's about the preparation of data, coding of data, establishing those themes and categories iteratively, actually, from where you've started with your studies, interpreting the data, and then establishing that trustworthiness and credibility in your final research findings.